This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
If your fashion wish list lives rent-free in your brain, you need to be on Poshmark. With Poshmark, you're shopping millions of listings from thousands of closets, each curated by someone with their own style. Vintage finds, designer pieces, and everyday staples all in one place. Search for your favorites or let the discovery come to you. Poshmark makes it easy to find what you actually want to wear at prices that feel like a quiet win. Download the Poshmark app today and use code PODCAST10 when you sign up to get $10 off your first purchase.
People to think, and getting people to think requires some social disruption, disrupting conventional belief conventional thought. And I've heard a term recently, I just love this term, it's called adulting. And what adulting means is it means
swingers. Is that swingers? Is that like when you hook up with your neighbor?
No, that's called swinging.
Oh, okay.
This is called adulting. And I can, I understand how your mind will go to porn if I mention something adult.
It just happens.
It just happens. But not everybody's like that. Adulting is doing grown-up things. And
with your neighbor's wife.
Damn, Tom, you're killing me. It's doing grown-up things and having responsibilities such as a 9-to-5 job, a car payment, a mortgage, rent, or anything else that makes one think that they're a grown-up. And, putting it that way, as far as responsibilities such as the 9-to-5 job, paying a mortgage or a rent, a car payment, man, who the hell wants to grow up?
Not Ricky Schroeder, because according to him, his quote is, "I spent my whole childhood wishing I were older. Now I'm spending my whole adulthood wishing I was younger." That's a kid from Silver Spoons, right?
Yeah. And I think he grew up to be a TV cop.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I don't think adulthood necessarily means that it sucks. I don't believe that at all. When you're a kid, you're told what to do. You're told what time to go to bed. You don't have any responsibilities such as, paying the mortgage, paying rent, food, clothing, all the necessities of life. But you have no independence, or very little independence. You have very little freedom in your life. And to me, being an adult means that you're free, and you're free to make your own choices. And sometimes they're going to be right, sometimes they're going to be wrong, but they're yours.
Now, how about responsibility? How does that fit in with being a grown-up?
Well, I think that depends on the grown-up as far as how you handle responsibility. If you look back at, as I went over the definition of adulting, they talk about responsibilities, and responsibilities in our social, in our society, such as the 9-to-5 job, paying a mortgage or a rent, car payment, are those responsibilities that we really need, and do we need to call them our own? Do they have to be our responsibilities? I don't think so. I think that there's a huge movement of people who love tiny houses, for instance. They aren't going for the big McMansions. They're going for these little houses on wheels. I read recently about this guy who had a corporate job, but he's living in a van to pay off his student loans. He doesn't want them, and I think by making that sacrifice, he'll be better served in the long run. And we all know too about the economy, that it changed the way people view work, and that we see a lot of entrepreneurs starting up these days. That's because you can't necessarily depend on a 9-to-5 job. Job security is pretty much out the window. So, these things make some people feel like they're grown-ups and they're adulting. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to think about being an adult. Tom, what are some of the things that that you do, or things that happened in your life that made you feel like a grown-up?
Well, the one thing that comes to mind is when my father passed away, and I had to step up and take the role of taking care of, business and, getting my mom situated. And she had a business. She had inherited my father's business, so she had a business to try to run and try it while she's grieving. And we decided to sell it. So trying to go through that whole process while trying to grieve my father and, my rest of my family. I'm the youngest of 5, and a lot of my family was away or not, there. And I was actually with my mom. So, that was a moment where, and it was even before my father passed away, he saw that, I was taking him to the hospital to get chemo when he had cancer and stuff. So it was those moments that I kind of realized, like, wow, man, I'm not a kid anymore. And my dad, I don't have this figurehead to look to anymore. I got to be the one. I got to be the one that, helps out and gets stuff done.
I think that's one of the biggest differences between an adult and a child. A child can get away with not doing the things that they have to do. I mean, they're if they don't want to do something, they can throw a fit and not do them. Sometimes they'll get away with that. But as you grow older and you become an adult, sometimes you have to do things that you really don't want to do. Like you said, you don't want to have to take care of your parents who are sick. I mean, that's not something you would ever want, but you do it because you need to do it. And I mean, you want to do it in that sense. But,
my son had, he has a parade that he's going to be in for Christmas, and they, we were meeting, it was for our church, and they're having a float, and they're going to walk down the beach and, throw out candy canes. And normally every year, this is a big event where we sit and watch. Me and my friends gather, and, we get some lawn chairs, we get down to the beach early, we hang out, and it's a good time. So I really did not want to participate because, every year I like to watch. But they needed spotters for this float. They needed like 6 adults to walk alongside the float in order to make sure that someone doesn't fall and, like a kid fall off the float, or someone, get caught between a trailer and the truck and what they call the death zone. And I was like, no one else was volunteering. I was like, you know what? I just need to step up and do the right thing. And, don't think about myself. I have to think about, my son and what's the right thing to do. And that's one of those kind of moments where, sometimes it sucks to make that grown-up decision, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, you were really adulting. You stepped up. I think what you mentioned though is also part of it. You realize that the world is bigger than just yourself, and you're not doing things just for selfish reasons. You're doing it for other reasons. You recognize there's a world beyond you, and you can do your part to make it better. From being an adult, technically it's any organism or human being that's reached sexual maturity. So if you're able to reproduce, technically you are considered to be an adult.
Okay, now I have something. Can I interrupt you here?
Go ahead.
I have something that recently my wife was telling me, and I have a nephew, and he's 11 years old, right? And he asked his mother the other day, he goes, where do babies come from? And you think that 11 years old, yeah, he kind of has a clue, but maybe not. So the mom's like, they're in the stomach, and, but he kept on persisting. He's like, well, how do they get in the stomach? And she's like, God puts them there. Well, how does God put the babies in your stomach? And then finally she looks at her husband, and, they're driving in the car, and she goes, all right. She goes, a man has a penis and a woman has a vagina, right? And he's like, well, how's that?
What?
What's that have to do with having a baby in your stomach, right? And he goes, and then you got to put the put them together, right? And he goes, wait a second, you and Dad? He goes, hold it right there. I don't want to hear anymore. I don't want to hear anymore. And that was the end of the conversation.
Our neighbors recently told us a very similar story about their daughter, who's about the age of my daughter, one of them at least. She's about 9 years old. And she was asking her mom about where she came from. And she said, my neighbor's very direct. And she just says, okay, you want to know where you come from? Okay, sit down. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to be straight up about it. So she told her. And she said the look of dismay, on her face. And she's like, so I take it that you also did that to get Ryan, her brother? And she's like, yes, we did. Like they only did it twice for the two kids. And she's like, oh, I just don't know you at all. You disgust me, and walks away.
It's something we don't want to think about. I remember when I used to hear that lock on my parents' door. It was a folding door. I don't know how to explain it. It's like a split down the middle.
A bifold door.
Bifold, yeah. And there was a lock at the top. And the only time they locked that, I guess, was when, hanky panky was going on. And when I heard that, I would just be like, ugh, and like run away. And I didn't want to be anywhere near the room.
Yeah, I remember those days of going over to your house. Your parents had some nooners.
Nooners?
Nooners.
Oh, nooners. I don't remember that.
Like they disappear into the room. I didn't know what they're doing. But
Dude, come here. It's time to get busy.
I guess we're showing that we're not necessarily mature, adults. But we all recognize that the fact that you've reached sexual maturity, you can have sex, you can reproduce, that doesn't make you an adult. I know plenty of people who aren't adults from that.
No, that's the thing. I mean, I see it all the time. There's people that are older than us, younger than us, but they're adults, but they don't act like adults. They don't, carry themselves like adults. They throw tantrums. They're very selfish. They don't have responsibility. I mean, there's lots of things that it takes to be an adult, and I don't think a lot of people are. Just because you're of age or older doesn't give you an automatic, ticket to the adult club.
Now in the United States, and this is different throughout the entire world, but within the United States, there's something called the age of majority. And what that is it's a fixed date, a fixed age, so that according to the law, if you're that age, then you're considered to be an adult. And that is the moment when minors cease to be legally considered children, and they assume control over their own lives, their actions and decisions, and therefore terminate any legal control or legal responsibility of their parents over them. So in the United States, that's 18. Once you're 18, you're considered to be a legal adult. And what I find very interesting is that you can be 18, you can join the army, you can serve your country and be killed and war, and serving your country. But you're not old enough to drink, because in most states you have to be 21 to drink alcohol. And that's never, ever, made sense to me. So, there's a legal way of looking at adulthood. There's a biological way of looking at adulthood. But, I think that being an adult and what it means to be an adult is different for everybody. And, socially speaking, our society has said, well, there's a very direct and short path to being an adult. You get your education, you get a job, you get married, you buy a house, you have children. It's almost in order that you're expected to do these things. And I think that's one of the reasons why I hear this term adulting so often. And it's because, I think that it's because people are a little confused as what it really means to be an adult. And, they're not necessarily following that short, direct route, that traditional route that are that older people have gone through. People are not getting married as often. We have a lot of people who, they call it failure to launch. There are a lot of 30 somethings that are still living with their parents. Are they not considered to be adults because they're living with their parents? I don't have the answer for that. I think it all depends. But being an adult really means that you're independent, you're self-sufficient, I think it should mean that.
According to Psychology Today, they have 6 major aspects of an adult life. One of them is rationality. The next one is formulating and implementing goals, equality in relationships, active versus passive, whether being adults are proactive or self-assertive rather than passive and dependent, non-defensive and openness, and personal power. The one thing I see real quick where I wanted to talk on the being dependent. Now, there's some people that don't want to grow up, John. Or there's some people that do not want to take responsibility and they want someone else to cater to them or handle everything for them. And, I see this all the time. I even see it with, with like my mom. Sometimes she'll be afraid to call somewhere, if she has a problem, like some Verizon's been sticking extra charges on her bill. She's scared to call them. And she wants, me to take care of it because, she was probably used to at the time of my father doing that for her.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people who don't really want to grow up. And I think that's really the point is that, what does that mean? I married late in life. Okay. I went to school. I followed the traditional route in many different ways. But I did marry late in life. I married in my early 30s, and actually, I kind of started off late. But I have a job, and I went to college, and I'm married, and I have children. But in some ways, I'm not that mature. I mean, I don't try to be. I don't want to be. To me, being an adult seems kind of overrated, and I'm too fun to be serious. I don't want to be that mature.
Well, it's funny because you don't think you change, and you really don't. I mean, I still think a lot of the same thoughts like when I was 15. So do I. I still like comic books. I still like science fiction. I still like working out, and I still like the fun things in life. And I don't see myself as a person that gets real serious in a corporate job. I don't take myself too seriously. And I'm approaching 50 years old, and I think about that sometimes. I'm like, man, at 70, am I going to think the same way? If I've lasted this long, I probably will. But then there's other things that come out of my mouth about responsibility and stepping up that I probably would have never said when I was in my early 20s. So I guess it's transparent, but it's almost emerging. It's still the same person. It's just a little bit more emotionally evolved, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're more experienced, but just because you're more experienced with life doesn't mean that you're not going to laugh when somebody says balls.
or at fart jokes. Still laugh when my son farts. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that we're all pretty much the same people. I don't think there's a defining moment in life to where you're grown up 100%. I do believe though that there are coming of age moments in a person's life, and what I mean by that is, back many societies would have some type of test, to act as a milestone for to become into an adult. And for me, my coming of age really, I think maybe I've had many different moments that I would consider be coming of age, but after I graduated college, I had some time to kill, and I decided to go out to Colorado for a few months. I didn't have a job. I had just graduated college. I had some obligations because I leased a house. So I had a key ring full of keys, with for the properties and managing these things. And I just slowly but surely untangled that web of responsibility that I had until I had my car key. and I took off in this old 1976 Volvo 4-door, mustard colored, puke colored car. It was terrible. It had like 267,000 miles on it, and I drove out from Atlanta to Colorado, and I stayed out there several months. And I'm probably mixing up. I actually went out to Colorado several different times, but I went out the first time I went by myself. That to me was coming of age, because being independent and being free means that you can go and do anything that you want. And for me to be able to hop in my car and drive out to Colorado by myself was a huge thing for me. And I love Corvettes as well. So what I did is I actually took off. One time I took off and I went up to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and went to the Corvette Museum just by myself. And then, saw the museum and hung out and then drove out to Colorado. I think if anyone ever gets a chance to do that, to take a trip like that by themselves, they absolutely should. I have a good friend who, after he graduated, he went to Europe, and he hiked around Europe for several months. I think those type of experiences really open up your mind to the world. They open the world up for you. And
yeah, but what happens about, now we're married, we have kids and careers. You can't just take off and go on a hiatus, man. It's hard enough even to take your vacation time without losing it because you got so many projects at work. How do you handle that?
Well, I mean, that's absolutely true. That's tough to do, isn't it? When I went down in October down to Florida for the lifestyle design conference with you, I mean, that was tough, but I think it was very important to have those type of adventures, to just go off and explore and do things. How do you do it? I mean, you have to plan it a lot more. You need to make sure that your responsibilities are met, especially if you have a wife and children. But I think those trips and the guy weekends, kind of just getting away and being yourself, I think it's a healthy thing. I know it's healthy for me. I know that a lot of people these days, especially entrepreneurs, are much younger, and they can take risks. Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, it's a great book. But when I remember reading it, I'm thinking, this is great for him because he's not married, he doesn't have kids, and he can travel, he can pick up, and he can go to South America for 6 months. And you're absolutely, what he was right about is that if you have a dream, you can put a dollar amount on it. Like, for instance, when Tim went to South America to live, he figured, he did his research, he figured out it would cost him so much for rent, so much for food, he'd need travel money, he figured it all out, and he came up with some amount, and he made sure that he had that. And then he just packed up his stuff in the storage and went and he did it. Now, for me, with my wife and children, I can't do that. I'm not going to take them out of school, and I can't just think of myself. But as far as, living out your dreams, you can still do that. Absolutely. Even if you have a wife and children or other, significant other partner, you can put a dollar amount on an adventure, and you can figure out how to get that money, save up that money, and take that trip.
There's I've been, when I not retire so much, but when I get a little bit older, I want to get an RV and travel around. That's what my parents did. When I was 17, my father kicked me out of the house, sold the house, and said, "Hey, we're buying an RV. See ya." So they traveled around the United States for a couple of years, and that's cool because he always wanted to do that, and I really like that too. I would love to have an RV and go to different towns and go to different jiu-jitsu schools and train, and that's kind of like even why I got into new media kind of stuff, building websites and my jiu-jitsu blog, because I wanted something later on for me and my wife, because she does jiu-jitsu, that we could go around and travel in an RV. Well, there's a family that, and plus I got kids, so I got to wait till they're grown up. But there's a family I think they're from Florida too. And they said, you know what, why wait? And they sold their house, they bought an RV, and they homeschooled their kids, and they travel around. And, now I think one of the kids is aging out and going to go to college. But it's kind of a unique experience for them. Now, there are some sacrifices to that, because maybe the children don't develop good childhood bonds because they don't have kids that around their age that they can really, hang out with. They might run into them in a campground or something like that, but they're not going to be with them all like me and you were, when we grew up together. So you kind of miss out on certain things too. So
but look at what they gain though. When you travel, you are experiencing something, and you're seeing the world in a different way. And I think that opens your mind. I read about a family that sold all their possessions, bought a sailboat, and they're cruising the sailboat around South America. And what an adventure that is. And even though you might not meet friends growing up in the neighborhood, if you're not a part of a neighborhood, if you're floating around, it's kind of hard to do that. But think of how tight that family has to be. No electronics, no internet. It's just them and life, experiencing life. I think that the family bond must be incredibly strong to be able to do that. So I agree with you. I think that, yes, you give up some stability, but you also gain something much, much greater, I think. And I think in this world, look at the job market. Back when I was in graduate school, there was a teacher of mine that said, if you have more than 2 jobs in 2 different companies, you're doing something wrong. Well, he was an older professor, and the world just is not that way anymore. There is no such thing as company loyalty. It's you go where the dollars are. You go to make money, and the companies, you're expected to look out after yourself. The company's not going to look out after you, which I think kind of touches upon what you were saying earlier, Tom, about responsibilities. Some people want to be looked out after or looked after. And other people want to be independent and free. I think it all, is one person less of an adult because of that? I don't know. But
I think we've all been there. I mean, I've been places where it's like, I don't want to be the leader. I don't want to be the person in charge, and, it's sometimes sometimes it's out of fear. We've talked about this in another episode, but sometimes it's just out of, I don't want to deal with it. It's not my thing, let someone else handle it. And, it's.
Now, when you say that though, Tom, are you saying from a work perspective, or are you saying from your life?
Probably more from a work perspective. Sometimes people ask, how come I'm not the boss? I went through several bosses, and people will ask, hey, well, how come you don't go for the job? It's like, I don't want that responsibility. It's not my passion. I don't want to be in that role. I'm happy where I am.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. I have advanced degrees, and people ask me, why aren't you higher up the ladder? And I'm not higher up the ladder by choice. I mean, I don't want that responsibility. I like my life. I have a lot of freedom. I have a lot of latitude. I have a lot of control over the work that I do, and I enjoy that. If I move up the ladder, I have to take on a lot more responsibility, and care a lot more about that business. And I'm just, my head's not there right now. I don't know if it ever will be, but where my head is at is, taking care of my family, providing for my family, creating a world for myself, and using everything that I possibly can to my own advantage. So, contributing to my 401k, having that retirement fund, living simply. So, living in a smaller house that I can afford. And so I have money to kind of put away. And ultimately, starting probably in a year from now, I'm going to start accelerating the mortgage to pay that off as quickly as possible. I think that you can work within the conventional belief and get some of those things that kind of, so you're not, outcasts or, totally rebelling. Because, it's nice to have a roof over your head. It's nice to have a nice house, a nice car. But what are you giving up to do that? I'm not going to, I don't need to live in a mansion. I have a nice house, and that's that's good enough for me. And I'm going to pay it off. And I think that goes against kind of conventional belief. I'm not ever going to have a car payment again. I've had it. It was the worst thing. I'd rather drive a beater. I don't, but I'm just not going to lock myself up into a situation like that to where I need to earn a high income to, and just to pay those bills. I'd rather earn a comfortable living and manage my expenses, because, there's if you're trying to make it in this world, it really comes down to two things: income and expenses. And a lot of people will focus on income and trying to maximize that salary. And that's fine. But what do you give up? Because the higher you go up the ladder, the more that company expects of you and the more that company owns you. So I prefer to take a different approach. I make a decent salary. I can make a good salary, but I keep my expenses low.
Live small, man.
Yeah. So, I think that there's a million different ways to take action and better your life. And, I'm not a person who's going to tell you do this, do that, do this, but I'll tell you what works for me. And what I'm doing right now, I've been on this financial plan for about the last 9 years. And next year, the only thing we'll basically owe is the house. And I have 3 children. I have a house. I have cars. I have boats. It can be done. It could be done.
All right. Any parting words? And so we're starting to hit the time. I think that adulthood is something subjective. It's a feeling, and it's not necessarily a thing. Think about what your expectations are of life, and how you view adulthood, and what does that mean to you, and also look at what do you consider, the importance of freedom and independence. Life is, adulthood to me is getting yourself to a point to where you accept yourself and your life as it is, and that you're able to work towards, longer term goals. Yeah, you are responsible for yourself.
Yeah, and you define you.
Sounds good. Check out swiftkickinass.com. We have a new membership site, which is free. You can check it out. You get all our giveaways, any kind of action guides we've created, our free simple spending tool, A lot of stuff is going to be coming there. There's going to be video courses. There's already actually a video course in there about procrastination. So if you want to get a swift kick in the ass, go to swiftkickintheass.com and sign up.
Yeah,
Thanks
we'll
for
keep
listening.
adding to it.
Peace.
So keep listening and talk to you all later.
See ya.